Fishtails, who, by the way, starting this Sunday, are open on Sundays for lunch. So it gives you another option besides Mexican. But Gail, she actually made them do this, where if you come in on Wednesday or Sunday with this card, then $1 of that purchase is going to be given back to First Baptist Zebulon. So I have 2,500 of these. So there is the potential of them giving us $2,500 back by us just recommending others. So I like to support people who support me, and I think that's a pretty grand way of supporting us. And I tend to just say yes, ma'am, to Gail Willis. So I think so, yeah. Ms. Gail, if you say so, yes, ma'am, we'll do it. So tonight in Bible study, we're back kind of in 1 Corinthians. We're sort of dropping in at different places in the book of 1 Corinthians. So we're not necessarily walking through it. We're not necessarily going verse by verse, but we're just sort of looking into that and dropping in along the way in certain different places. And so tonight we're dropping in chapter 10 and then going to look at verses 11, 12, and 13. First. Next week we'll be in the book of 2 Matthew. So, still working on that book, yeah. That's really good. So 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 11 to 13, he deals with temptation. And so I wanted to kind of share this little story that I read in an article the other day. It said, story goes like this, says, Toad baked some cookies. The cookies smell very good, said Toad. He ate one, and they taste even better, he said. So Toad ran to Frog's house. Frog, Frog, cried Toad, taste these cookies that I've made. And Frog ate one of the cookies. These are the best cookies I've ever eaten, said Frog. So Frog and Toad ate many cookies, one after another. You know, Toad, said Frog with his mouth full of cookies, I think we should stop eating. We'll soon be sick. You're right, said Toad. Let us eat just one last cookie and we'll stop. So Frog and Toad ate one last cookie, but there were many cookies left in the bowl. Frog, said Toad, let us eat one last cookie and we'll stop. So Frog and Toad ate one last cookie. We've got to stop eating, said Toad, as he ate another. Yes, said Frog, reaching for a cookie. We need willpower. What is willpower? Asked Toad. Willpower is trying hard not to do something you really want to do, said Frog. You mean like trying hard not to eat all these cookies? Right, said Frog. So Frog put the cookies in a box. There, he said. Now we won't eat any more cookies. But we can cut the string and open the box, said Toad. That's true, Frog said. So Frog got a ladder, put the box up high on a shelf. There, said Frog. Now we won't eat any more cookies. But we can climb the ladder, and we can take the box down from the shelf, and we can cut the string, and we can open the box, said Toad. That's true, said Frog. And so Frog climbed the ladder and took the box down from the shelf. He cut the string, and he opened the box. Frog took the box outside, shouted in a loud voice, Hey, birds, there are cookies. And birds came from everywhere, and they picked up all their cookies and in their beaks, and they flew away. And Frog said, kind of want a cake. And that really probably sums up most of our lives when it comes to dealing with temptation. The simple fact of the matter is temptation never, ever goes away. It doesn't matter what age you are, there's still going to be some form of temptation in your life. There's going to be something going on that you are tempted by. A recent survey of Discipleship Journal ranked the areas of greatest spiritual challenge to them. Number 9 was the challenge of lying. Interesting. Number 8 was gluttony. I think Frog and Toad are right there. Envy was number 7. And a tie for 5th was anger and bitterness and sexual lust. Number 4 was laziness. Number 3 was self-centeredness. Number 2 was pride. And number 1 was materialism. There's a whole gamut right there of different temptations that we all face. And sometimes the temptations I face are not the same as the temptation you face. I am not tempted to go buy high heels for any reason. Some of y'all are. I am tempted to go spend way too much money on golf clubs, and some of y'all think, man, that just puts me to sleep. But some of you go, man, get me some tools for woodworking, I'm in. I can never have too many of those. I think I can never have too many golf clubs. There's a temptation for me when it comes to shopping. I love to shop. I got it from Mom, I think. I can't have too many shirts. I can't have too many pants, too many shoes. And recently I'm in a thing of like, people take my socks, man, and I got to go buy socks. And so I just keep buying packs and packs of socks. And it's a temptation. But my wife, on the other hand, she cannot stand to go shopping. She don't want anything. I lucked out. I bought one piece of jewelry since her wedding ring, and that's it. She don't even wear the watch that I bought her because she's like, I'm not into jewelry. So I lucked out. So there's no temptations there. But we all have them. We all face them. And when we drop into 1 Corinthians, we're going to see what he says on the subject of temptation. And maybe that helps us tonight. So in chapter 10, verse 11, he writes it this way. Now these things happened to them as examples, and they were written as a warning to us on whom the ends of the ages have come. Therefore, whoever thinks he stands must be careful not to fall. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to humanity. God is faithful, and he will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation he will also provide a way of escape so that you are able to bear it. So in other words, and I think it reads it this way, we can't do it alone, but he's going to provide you a way out. Our job in the midst of that is begin to look for it. So I want us to talk a little bit, and you got some notes there that's just a thing if you want to read that later, or if you have friends you want to share it with, or spend some time in devotion with. It's all about overcoming temptation. But I want to provide just some insights tonight from this one text that I think are really important for us to get. And the first one is this: to understand and know that you are not beyond temptation. You are not. Notice how he says that in verse 12. Whoever thinks he stands must be careful not to fall. Sometimes we think we're above the temptation. Sometimes we think it's going to be no big deal to us. And we put ourselves in situations that all of a sudden the temptation's there. And if we're not careful, it's there. There are temptations for me. There are temptations for you. We are not so mature and so spiritual that we ever get to a point where we go, I'm not tempted. And so we've got to be careful and realize that we can be tempted. And we got to be careful not to fall. And sometimes that is also in the way we look at our brothers and sisters. And we look at them like, how could you? How stupid was that you did? And there's a lot we don't understand about their situation when we tend to judge in that moment. Author named F.B. Meyer wrote this. He says, I believe who once said that when we see a brother or sister in sin, there are two things we do not know. First, we do not know how hard he or she tried not to sin. It's true. We oftentimes see the sin or the outcome or the consequences of that sin, but we don't often see in that person's life how hard it was for them and maybe how hard they tried not to sin. And all of a sudden we think, oh, I'm beyond that. Oh, I'm beyond sin. That didn't tempt me. But we don't know how hard they tried not to. And secondly, he said, we do not know the power of the forces that assailed him or her, and we also do not know what we would have done in the same circumstance. In other words, every circumstance is different. And if we're not careful, we'll start judging like we can't sin and we can't be tempted and we can't fall into that temptation. And we have to learn how it is do we then handle that. Now, the second thing that we're going to learn from that, so the first is we're not beyond it. The second thing we're going to learn is that your temptation is not unique. Oftentimes people tell me when they're talking to me about different things, they'll say, well, you don't know what I'm going through. And the Bible's real clear that maybe my temptation and your temptation is not the exact same detail, but it comes from the same place. It comes from that same situation in that moment. There are certain places that I don't need to go and certain things that I don't need to see if that's my temptation. There's certain things that I don't need to be around if that's where mine is, where other people can go and sit and it's not a temptation. For instance, there's no temptation, and this is not me bragging whatsoever, but you could take me to a place that's got a bar and there's no temptation for me. Not interested in drinking, it's not a thing for me. But I would be careful who I take with me because it may be for them, but it's that temptation to do what we're not supposed to do that the devil puts in our way. It's the same for all of us. There's just a whole different types of lures. You go fishing and you got different types of lures for different types of weather, for different types of location, and you got to know which lure is right. And that's one thing the devil does know. He knows what lures to put in front of your face, and he knows how to make it happen and put it there. It's amazing when I have a little bit of extra money that I need to save how I will discover a new golf store. Or something that I don't really need will be on sale at the moment that I didn't really need it, because God knows, or the devil knows, there's my temptation. That's Matt's place where spending money will get him in trouble and he will waste it. Or make a little bit of extra money, have a little bit of extra money and go to a Georgia Bulldogs game. And everywhere you look is Georgia Bulldogs gear. And you know what the devil says? Can't get that at home. You can't order that on the internet. And then you start, well, I can't get that on the internet. I better get it here. Well, you can't get that on the internet. Well, I better get it here. And before you know it, you're going home with a ton of money that you should have never spent. And the devil knows your temptation, but it isn't unique. Notice that he says in verse 13, no temptation has come upon you except what is common to humanity. And what that teaches me and tells me is that you're not the first one that's been there, done that. Other people have too. And therefore, there's help to be found. If somebody else has faced it, if somebody else has dealt with it, then that means somebody's been there and somebody's done that. And if you'll reach out and look for help in the right places, it can help you in that process of overcoming that sin. Here's the this is the thing that men are bad at. And we're often, as Christians, really bad at asking for help in overcoming sin because we don't want anybody to think we're in sin. I asked the church one time, I'm like, why don't y'all ever walk the aisle and go pray at the altar? Because somebody might think I'm in sin. But you're going and praying for your neighbor who's in sin, not you. Well, they might think. And so we're afraid of what other people will think. We're afraid, like F.B. Meyer said, that people are going to infer things about our situation if they see me praying. But God says, look, you're not alone in this. You wonder if the person walking the aisle is in sin? They are, and so is everybody else out here too. We're all in sin. We've all done things in sin, and we have to get to a place where we're willing to say, I need help, and I got to look for it, and I got to find ways to get me through that. So our temptation isn't necessarily unique, and also the third thing is you're not alone during these temptations. You're not alone. Notice verse 13 says, but God is faithful. In other words, he's not missing that moment. Your temptation didn't sneak up on him while he was over here being faithful to this person. He wasn't forgetting about you over there, that at the very same moment that God is interacting with me in faithfulness, he's interacting with you in faithfulness. That's what omniscience and omnipresent is. He can be fully here with you and fully here with me at the same time. And when I go to him in prayer, I've got, you know how you are with your kids, and you really need their attention, you really need them to listen. You're like, look me in the eye, me and you, right here, focus. That's the way Jesus is with us. at the same time, he's that way with somebody else. That's the power of God and what he can do in their life. And so we know then that God is faithful. In the Australian bush, there's a plant that grows. It's called the sundew. I love this little plant. It's a slender stem, and it's really small, and it has round leaves, and it's fringed with hair on it that glistens with like bright drops of liquid, like a fine dew, and that's where it comes the name, the sundew plant. Problem is, it's deadly to the insect that happens to get on it. The leaves are deadly. The shiny moisture on each of the leaves is sticky, and it will imprison the bug when it touches it. It's like you can't get away. And as an insect, if it struggles to free itself, the vibration causes it to tighten up on it, and this plant then feeds on it. And it looks so pretty. And it looks like a great thing. And sometimes we feel like we're on our own and we're just walking towards the little sundew plant. And God's like, not only am I faithful, but don't feel like you're alone in all this, because you know what? Everybody else is walking towards their sundew plant if they're not careful. All the insects can be just as trapped by that one little thing, by that curiosity, by that thing that gets us. And I'll never forget this, and I got to tell you this, and it's funny, but it's sad, and it's an illustration here just the same. When we first moved into our house in Greenville, we were trying to make sure we had no little mice, field mouse, that got in the house. And so we had put the little sticky traps out all over the house, and we put them under the bed. And my daughter had just learned to explore. And so I hear she's crawling around. She's like this tall, nothing big's going on happening. And then all of a sudden I hear and I hear this bump, and I'm like, and I hear this other bump, and there's some mumbling. And I'm like, where's Maddie? And you hear this little noise, and we're looking around the house for Maddie until we look under the bed, and she's explored under the bed, and she's got her forearm and the side of her face on the mouse sticky trap, and she's stuck, and she can't talk, and Carrie is absolutely freaking out. And Dad is sitting there dying laughing. I'm just like, that is the funniest thing I have ever seen in my life. I'm like, wow, that you just don't see that every day. And Carrie's like getting mad at me, get her out. And they're freaking call 911, do this, do that. And I mean, how are we going to get this glue trap off of her? And I'm like, just chill. We heated it up just a little bit, peeled it right off. Everybody was fine. But later on, I'm like, that's sort of, if you think about it a little bit, that's like the picture of temptation and sin in our life. We want to go explore, and we want to see how close we get. And the more that little bitty bit does it, because the glue trap, it's got glue, but it's got a little piece around it. And you mess with it a little bit, and you're like, oh, no big deal. It's not that big deal. I can get loose. But you make one false move, and it gets stuck a little more, and then it gets stuck a little more, and then before you know it, you can't even talk. It's stuck to your face and everything, and you're just like, nah, like this in your glue trap. And that's what sin does to us. It's like you want to explore, and we get out there just a little bit, and before you know it, it's got us stuck, and we're in trouble. But we're not alone in the middle of that temptation, because he's going to give us a way through it. Now, we're not going to be able to do this always by ourselves. Like if your temptation is, whatever your temptation is, there's things you got to do. I remember taking a group of men on a mission trip to New Orleans. We'd go down and we'd build houses after Hurricane Katrina. We'd rebuild houses. And everybody, we usually want to take them and show them the French Quarter one night at least while we're in New Orleans. We got to go get seafood, and you got to sit down and eat beignets. You got to have Cafe Du Monde. And they're like, well, we're here. I want to at least see Bourbon Street. So I'm like, all right, I'll be your tour guide. I'll take you down Bourbon Street a little bit. Notice I said a little bit. So we'll walk through these dark alleys, and we'll get down there. Bourbon Street, it's fun, it's jazz, no big deal. We walk and walk and walk, and then all of a sudden you get to this one part where there's swings coming out of the windows, and there are certain women on those swings. And you start going, okay, guys, you've seen Bourbon Street. I'm taking a left. What you do from here on out, that's up to you. That's on you. They all follow me every time, but I'm like, for plausible deniability, it's time for me to take a left. But why would I know that it's time for me to take a left? Because God is faithful, and he's like, hey, I know you see that. And I know it's tempting. But you see that road to the left right there? That'll take you back to Cafe Du Monde. And Cafe Du Monde may get you fat, but it won't get you in trouble with mama. And so he's like, it's like in the middle of that situation, God is going, you can't do this by yourself, but look over here, because there's this that's going to get you out of it. And we have to make that move. Now, you take a bunch of rednecks from Meriwether County down to Bourbon Street and see their faces, the things they see, they're just floored. We had a guy in a purple suit with the full pimp hat, the feather, come up to us, give us a card, and they thought it was a joke. And I'm like, no, dude, that's a real pimp. No, you're kidding. No, that is a real, like, whatever you see down there, it's real. And you got to look for the lefts along the way. But know that God is there, and he's given us those way out. And that leads us to the last point for tonight. You got to take the way out of temptation. Otherwise, you're just going to get stuck like Maddie did on the trap. Otherwise, we're just in trouble, and we are stuck, and we will find our way into a mess, and we will not be in a good place. Margaret Thatcher said, you got to fight a battle sometimes more than once to win it. And sometimes your battle with temptation is going to take a couple battles to do it. But don't give up. God is there with you. He will provide a way out. Notice verse 13, but with temptation, he will also provide the way out so that you may be able to bear it. Some random circumstance may happen in the middle of your temptation, but don't discount it, because that may be God stepping in and going, here's the way out. Here's the way to get past it. Here's the way to get through it. It's amazed me how many times I've learned now going to the hospitals in Atlanta. I like to go to Hampton, take a right on 20, and then get on the interstate from there around McDonough over there. And that's usually a faster way for me, but there's a golf shop right there on the right. But it's in an obscure place. And so the last couple times I've been by there, the traffic has been so bumper to bumper, not moving. And I'm like, I ain't even trying. I'm just going around and keep going. And I look back and I go, maybe that's God's way of saying, you don't need to go over there today. You're good. You don't need to hit that. Just keep going, and traffic won't be that bad. And we have to look for the way out. But the thing is, and here's the thing, it's so enticing. It's so, that temptation, man, the devil's going to tailor it to each of you. And so you can't discount it, and you can't say, I'm okay, because God, the temptation is coming at you from the devil in a way that only works for you a lot of the times. One thing that I read in a book called The Words and Works of Jesus Christ was this. It says, what is temptation? Temptation is a seduction to evil, a solicitation to wrong. It stands distinguished from trial. Thus, trials test, and they seek to discover the man's moral qualities or character. But temptation persuades the evil, deludes it, that it may ruin. The one who means to undeceive, the other to deceive. The one aims at the man's good, the trial, making him conscious of his true moral self, but the other, the temptation, at his evil, leading him more or less unconsciously into sin. God tries, Satan tempts. And so those trials are leading you to see where it is I need to work, where it is I need to ask Jesus to benefit my life. Satan, on the other hand, is tempting every stitch of the way to catch you into something that you cannot come back from. I love this quote by Mark Twain. He said, there are several good protections against temptation, but the surest is cowardice. Several good protections against temptation, but the surest is cowardice. Because that sin tempts. Oh, I'm a man. I'm brave. Let's go for it. That go for it takes courage. And Twain is getting at, just be a coward a little and realize that thing's going to bite me. That thing's going to get me, and it's eventually going to eat me like that sundew plant, and it's going to consume me. It is going to bring me trouble. Think about this story that I read from back in 1990. We know children, man, we love teddy bears. Teddy bears are big again. My daughter wants like the life-size one for her room. It's a huge deal. They're so cuddly, and they seem to be so real. But did you know in 1990, 2 boys scaled the fence at the Bronx Zoo in New York and went into the polar bear compound. Both of them had polar bear teddy bears in their room that they cuddled with. And they tried to cuddle with those. And the sad thing is, the next day, both bodies were found. And you know what the headline said? Your pet sin can kill. See, all of us got some little pet something that's our sin. But Jesus and his word and praying and putting together and going together in that can overcome us. Remember that survey that I gave you at the beginning on the top 9 or 10 different challenges facing people? It also said this. Respondents noted temptations were more potent when they had neglected their time with God and when they were physically tired. Resisting temptation was accomplished by prayer, avoiding the compromising situation, Bible study, and being held accountable to somebody else. That's what it takes, a village to overcome sin oftentimes. And we as a church, we're that village. And we can't be worried about what somebody else thinks I'm doing if I go and pray. And we can't be worried about what somebody else is going to think about me. And we can't be worried about, why did they make that decision? We don't know how they were tempted. But by the grace of God, there we would be also. And so the great thing is, there's a way out. And there's a way through every temptation. It's going to require you to find rest, read God's word, get to know him, and have it on the tip of your brain that when that temptation to sin happens, we think, man, here's what God's word says. He's going to be with me, and he's going to show me a way out. And then you start looking and go, where's my way out? Get out of temptation, get away from that sin as quickly as we possibly can. God, tonight we thank you that all these times we're asking for an instruction manual for life, and we think, how in the world are we going to figure all this thing out in life? And wouldn't it be so great if life just came with instructions? God, help us and forgive us for the times we forget that your word is that instruction manual, that it's real and that it's present in our life. And God, if we would just get to know it and thereby get to know you, it could help us in the midst of our temptation. So we ask it tonight in your name. Amen.